Welcome to A Year and a Day Segment 4, Introduction to the Autumn Equinox. Now, if you're familiar with the Wheel of the Year, you may be wondering why I've chosen the autumn equinox as our starting point for this Year and a Day study. Traditionally, many people choose to go with either Halloween or Yule as their starting point, which does make sense, and we'll touch on that in a later video. However, I've chosen the autumn equinox simply because it just feels right to me. And the one thing you'll find as a common theme as I go about teaching these lessons is, I believe that absolutely everything in the nature-based spirituality path should be based first and foremost on your intuition. The autumn equinox holds special meaning for me because, in my perspective, it's the one time of the year when it's beautifully evident that the seasons are changing. And yet, in the commercial culture that I've grown up in, it's one of the most highly underrated seasonal holidays. People in the United States tend to skip right over the autumn equinox and jump right into Halloween, Thanksgiving, and even Christmas. As you know from what I've shared in the previous segments, I was raised Muslim and was not allowed to celebrate any of those commercial holidays. But since I've always had a strong connection to the seasons, I naturally gravitated towards the autumn equinox, or autumn in general, just because it's so easy to rejoice in the colors and scents of the season without necessarily buying into the stereotypical traditions of the mainstream holidays. Sure, I was prohibited from carving faces on pumpkins and decorating with witches' hats, but hey, nobody could tell me I couldn't collect leaves and acorns and decorate my yard with them. For me, the autumn season is a beautiful reminder that, hey, nature doesn't discriminate, and people from any tradition, culture, or background have the right to enjoy and appreciate all of nature's abundant gifts. Now, I'm aware that my situation was fairly unique. My family's roles and values were definitely not the norm in my local community, so if you've grown up in the Western world, most likely you're accustomed to participating in some variation of Halloween or Thanksgiving. But if you're like most people I've met, you probably aren't too well acquainted with the more obscure origins and traditions surrounding the autumn harvest festivals. So let's get to the part that's fascinating for all of us regardless of our background, learning the history and hidden meanings of the autumn equinox. So let's start with the basics. What is the autumn equinox? Well, on a purely scientific level, an equinox is what occurs when the sun is directly over the equator, causing the length of the daylight and the length of the darkness to become equal that day. This happens only twice a year, once in the spring and once in the fall. After the spring equinox, the days begin to grow longer than the nights, leading into the warm and bright days of spring and summer. 6 months later, though, at the autumn equinox, the reverse is true. After the autumn equinox, the nights begin to grow longer than the days, leading into the colder, darker half of the year. The exact date and time of the autumn equinox as an astronomical phenomenon may vary slightly from year to year, but generally it occurs around September 21st or 22nd, and that's when the autumn equinox as a holiday is traditionally celebrated. Some also choose to enjoy this type of harvest celebration around the harvest moon, which is the full moon that occurs in September. Now that being said, let me insert a little disclaimer here. I've lived on the East Coast of the United States for my entire life, and therefore my Year in a Day program does have a Northern Hemisphere bias. What this means is that in this course we'll be following the traditional Northern Hemisphere version of the Wheel of the Year. For someone who happens to live in the Southern Hemisphere, like in Australia for example, the checkpoints on the Wheel of the Year will be reversed. Our autumn equinox is their spring equinox, and so on. Regardless of where you live, though, when an equinox occurs, it's that special time that reminds us that the seasons are changing. The word equinox means equal night, and while the days have been growing shorter since the summer solstice, after this day, when we have 12 hours of each, daytime and nighttime, the dark half of the year is officially begun. If you do your own research, you'll find that there are tons of different traditional meanings associated with the autumn equinox. Many traditions incorporate beautiful stories about gods and goddesses with themes of death and rebirth and their correspondence with the circle of life. However, for this secular exploration of the Wheel of the Year, we'll be focusing mainly on themes that are common throughout all traditions, the energetic shifts that occur along the Wheel of the Year, which can be embraced and honored by everyone. In that way, there are three major themes associated with the autumn equinox: balance, gratitude, and preparation. So we'll start with balance. Because this is a time when the planet and the sun are in a state of balance, with days and nights at equal length, It's a wonderful time to pause your everyday shuffle and take a moment to do what I call recalibrating. In our modern society where we're always doing, the seasonal checkpoints of nature remind us to stop and acknowledge where we're at in life. It's the perfect time to observe what we've been up to over the summer, decide how we intend to spend our winter, and let go of any habits we may have fallen into that are no longer necessary as we go forth into this next phase of the year. Maybe you've accomplished a lot over the summer, but haven't really stopped to enjoy the fruit of your labor. Or perhaps you've been so comfortable during your summer vacation that the responsibilities of school or work may come as a nasty shock if you don't take a second to get with the program. The autumn equinox is your opportunity to sit on your own, take some deep breaths, meditate, and journal about how far you've come and how you're choosing to move forward. Next, on the subject of gratitude, the autumn equinox is a time of thanksgiving, literally. A lot of people in nature-based spirituality consider the autumn equinox the pagan Thanksgiving, and for good reason. Believe it or not, based on my research, the American Thanksgiving, which is now celebrated in late November, was originally celebrated around the autumn equinox, but it was later changed to support commercial consumerism. So if you're accustomed to celebrating Thanksgiving, this is basically the same holiday. On the wheel of the year, the autumn equinox is considered the second harvest celebration, the time when the main portion of the hardy crops are brought in to prepare for the winter. At least where I live in New York, just looking around, it's extremely evident that nature is sharing its abundance everywhere. Scattered all over the ground, there are nuts and seeds and leaves in their brightest shades of reds, oranges, and yellows. The apples, pumpkins, and corn are ready to collect and enjoy, and people are starting to shift into that Thanksgiving mood. Here in the U.S., we're taught as children that Thanksgiving is a commemoration of a time in early American history when European settlers were welcomed by their Native American neighbors, and they shared a feast of their autumn crops together. Of course, those of us whose parents were independent thinkers were also taught that the commercialization of Thanksgiving is a cover-up for the unfair treatment of Native Americans throughout our history. Either way, though, it's easy to overlook the fact that without these fairly recent historical references, autumn has always naturally been a time of gratitude. In nature and in agriculture, the fall has always been a time to look back on what you've accomplished and enjoyed during the warm days of summer, and to show your appreciation for that success by sharing what you've earned with your friends and neighbors. In times past, establishing a good relationship with your neighbors in your local community was valued a lot more highly than it is now in our commercial society. The people you shared your harvest feast with in the fall might actually be the same neighbors who shared their resources with you in the dead of winter if your family ran out of something they desperately needed. So this time of year is a great time to remember how easy our lives are now, and to show our appreciation by celebrating togetherness. It's a great practice during the season to donate goods like canned food or used clothing, which are not all that valuable to you but might make all the difference to someone who's less fortunate. To those of you who have that inescapable tradition of family obligation on November 26th, but wish you could include other friends in your autumn gratitude celebrations, it's a fun idea to host an early Thanksgiving feast on the autumn equinox. Make it a fun potluck dinner, where people who can't make it to your normal Thanksgiving dinner can come to your home and celebrate this time of year with you. Or if you'd rather celebrate the autumn equinox on more of a solitary level, start a tradition for yourself or your family by going out into nature. Go on a hike in the woods or find a local orchard where you can pick your own apples and pumpkins. On a spiritual level, if you're into the law of attraction, you know that the first step to manifesting something new in your life is by expressing gratitude for the blessings you already have. The autumn equinox is the perfect time to establish a gratitude practice of some kind. I'm excited to share a lot of fun gratitude crafts with you guys in upcoming videos, so stay tuned. The third and final autumn equinox theme we'll be covering in today's video is not necessarily as fun and jovial as the others we've talked about, but it's definitely not to be overlooked. It's the theme of preparation, or as they say in Game of Thrones, winter is coming. Yes, we're celebrating the accomplishments and manifestations of summer, but we must also take this time to look ahead at the 6 months of darkness and cold that are in our very near future. Depending on where you live, your winters may be mild or harsh, but either way, it's important to accept that summer has come to an end. We must acknowledge the overall theme of duality in nature. For every day, there is a night. For every summer, there's a winter. And for every gain, there's a loss. The nature of existence is that things progress in cycles, and there's an ebb and flow to every aspect of life. It's a great time to do some fall cleaning or to plan an indoor renovation project. If you're a creative business owner like me, it's also a great time to do some behind the scenes work for your brand. As we're preparing to spend more time indoors, naturally it's also the right time to turn our gaze inward, to take this opportunity to do the inner work necessary to thrive more in the future. It's the perfect time to begin your practice of spiritual journaling. So there you have it, the autumn equinox in a nutshell. Now that we've completed our introduction to the Wheel of the Year and discussed the importance of journaling through the journey, it's time to put our pen where our mouth is. Going forward, we'll begin our journaling process with weekly writing topics. For our first entry, we'll ease into the journaling practice with a simple question. What does the autumn equinox or the fall season in general mean to you? Does it fill your heart with warm memories of your childhood? Is it a powerful time for you energetically, or are there some shadow aspects that come up for you during this time of the year? Really relax and get into this journal entry. At this time of balance and transition, you owe it to yourself to dig deep, to get into that meditative state and see what flows out of you and onto the paper. If you'd like to share your thoughts with us, please give us a snippet of your journal entry in the comment section of this article. I'd love to learn about what the autumn equinox means to you, and I'm sure that our other members would love to hear from you and share in the discussion. Enjoy the journey, and until next time, blessed be.